Hello world of YouTube, Superjet Spade here, and what's this? An actual human voice that isn't Polygon speech synth? Yes, folks, the voice you're hearing is, in fact, my actual voice. I thought that I would do a voice reveal to commemorate reaching 2,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. I never thought I would reach this many subscribers, let alone 1,000 when I achieved that milestone back in 2020. So, this is my thanks to all of you who have subscribed to listen to my originals and covers. Since I'm at a point now where I'm comfortable using my actual voice, this means that I can retire the Polygon version of my elf Sona from future announcement and non-music related videos.
What will I end up doing now?
I've done 2 Polygon stories with the unit that maybe I could share on my second channel, if I ever feel like it.
Sounds ingenious.
Now then, I think what I want to do for this special video is expand upon my Chiptune Journey article that I put on my website and published over at the blog at the Chiptune Cafe website, going into a bit more detail about some stuff, and adding some things that I didn't mention there and in my YouTube channel history video. So, without any further delay, let's begin. I must mention first that my conscious memory only goes as far back as when I was 8. I am 27 years old as of the making of this video, so 2005 is the earliest that I can recall any of my memories. Anything from before only exists in fragments. But I do know that from one of those fragments, I had a Game Boy Color. I have a very faint memory of having one when I would have been a toddler, so around 1999 or 2000. The games I remember playing on this system were Super Mario Land, Donkey Kong 94, Rampage Universal Tour, and maybe Pokemon Yellow version, because I remember hearing Pikachu's voice. I was 2 or 3 around this time, and though I was born in Puerto Rico, my parents had already settled in Ohio with my sister being a newborn. In my Chiptune Journey article, I mentioned that I was imagining games with custom characters and music, but I think I was more so imagining some kind of modification of Donkey Kong 94, where Mario is basically super powered whenever I lost at one of the game's levels. Little toddler Spade couldn't comprehend the complexity of the game's later levels, only going as far as one of the levels in the third world. I also couldn't comprehend the RPG mechanics in Pokemon Yellow, and I never got past World 3 in Super Mario Land. But I did like hearing the sounds the Game Boy Color was capable of, with its 2 pulse channels, a wavetable channel, and a noise channel all producing music and sound effects that little toddler Spade enjoyed. All of this is what I can recall from this part of my memory. As I mentioned before, any memory I have before I was 8 only exists in fragments, but I do have some more memories from when I was 6 or 7. Those of you who are either late millennials or early Gen Zers, like me, do any of you remember the SpongeBob plug-and-play TV game from Jack's Pacific? I believe I was 6 years old when my parents got me this in 2003. Like so many folks out there, I loved watching SpongeBob SquarePants as a kid, so naturally, I loved playing this as well as Battle for Bikini Bottom, and the game based on the first SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Most importantly for this video's topic is something I did notice about the audio coming from the plug-and-play TV game. There were no sampled sound effects or streamed audio, rather, the sounds were synthesized using a 50% square wave. And in some of the game's short jingles, it sounded like one of the square waves were alternating between multiple notes. This was the first time I have ever heard of what's known in the chiptune community as an arpeggio, which is when 2 or more notes are played in quick succession rather than at the same time, something that many chiptune musicians predominantly use in Commodore 64, NES, and Game Boy music. Like how toddler Spade from 3 to 4 years earlier was amused by the Game Boy Color's audio capabilities, 6-year-old Spade was amused by the audio that the SpongeBob plug-and-play console outputted onto the TV. I mentioned in my Chiptune Journey article that I think a Nintendo on a chip, aka NOAC, was probably used for the sound, with only the pulse channels and 50% square wave being used. I recall the system having a 2-voice polyphony, which would line up with the 2 pulse channels in the NES's sound chip, and I distinctly remember the bass in the intro jingle to Patrick and the Maze cutting off whenever you swung the net. Although, When I watched a playthrough video to refresh my memory of this, it sounded like there was no volume control at all for the two square wave channels, and it also sounded like there was a noise channel too. I am not certain on what the sound hardware is for the jack-specific SpongeBob plug-and-play TV game though. If someone out there has one and has opened it up, feel free to chime in on the comments below. In any case, this memory of mine is one that I have fond memories of, and it further cemented my interest in, for lack of a better term, synthetic sounds. Next up in my memory is when I got a Nintendo Game Boy Advance SP, which I believe I got in Christmas 2003. The first game I can remember playing on the system was Yoshi's Island Super Mario Advance 3, which is the first game that I can actually remember beating in 2006 when I was 9 years old. The final fight with the giant baby Bowser was hard, but I remember the accomplishment I felt when I hit him with the last egg. This is also the earliest in my life I can remember where I would just boot up a game and go to a level just to vibe to the music. At age 8 in 2004, that was when I started to appreciate video game music a lot more than I did before. Also at age 8, I got the Game Boy Advance port of Donkey Kong Country 2, and I immediately liked its soundtrack. My most favorite songs from this game are Hot Head Bop and Mining Melancholy. Since the Game Boy Advance SP has no headphone jack like its predecessor models, I basically held one of my ears to its only speaker to listen to the songs in whatever game I played. Some other games I remember playing on my Game Boy Advance SP were some Fairly Odd Parents game where you had to free the world from the anti-fairies, one of the Mega Man Battle Network games, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and Super Mario Advance 4, including 2 games from when I had my Game Boy Color. I also have a very faint memory of playing a Harvest Moon game that I never understood. I will let future editing Spade find whichever Harvest Moon game it was that I played on my Game Boy Advance SP. The Mega Man Battle Network game in particular was the only Game Boy Advance game I had where its soundtrack makes prominent use of the Game Boy sound channels in addition to its direct sound audio hardware, which usually does software mixing. The only other place I can think where the Game Boy channels were used were in the Mario Bros. Games included with both Super Mario Advance games I had. Looking back, I probably didn't notice that my Game Boy Advance SP had the Game Boy channels like in my Game Boy Color, probably because I didn't have too many Game Boy Advance games that made use of them, but I had fun playing and listening to the various songs from the games I had. In February 2007, sometime after I turned 10, my parents moved from Ohio to Florida. I had brought my Game Boy Advance SP with me, which did keep me company for the roughly day-and-a-half trip because I ran at the time a Ford Windstar, broke down at some point, though it ran out of charge at some point. We stayed over at one of my uncle's houses for the first few months before moving into a house that was for rent. At some point after moving, we visited the Flea World flea market at Sanford, Florida, which has since been demolished. I think it was there that my parents noticed a Famiclone. I distinctly remember that the console was shaped like a penguin with a bow tie. It had an infrared receiver with wireless remotes and what I'll refer to as a zapper. It was the very first time I got to play the original Super Mario Bros. Game since I remember seeing YouTube videos about it, as well as a few other NES games. First time I played Super Mario Bros., I took the warped route, going as far as World 4-1 before getting a game over. The second time, I decided to go warpless, and then got a game over in World 1-4. I can brush off game overs these days, since my sister always told me, it's just a game when we were kids. But when you're only 10 like I was in 2007, you do tend to get frustrated whenever you lose a game. The Penguin Famiclone did stop working after a few weeks, so it got thrown out. This was also a point in my life where I saw a bunch of corrupted Super Mario Bros. Videos and was amused by the corrupted sounds from each of them. Come fall 2007, and we moved into an apartment, and in Christmas of that year, I got a toy keyboard. This particular toy keyboard was covered by the 8-Bit guy over at his 8-Bit Keys channel in 2018, and the issues he mentioned about it were the very things I did experience. Namely, some of the keys were hard to press, and that you can play another key after holding down a key. But since I was 10, I very much enjoyed it, and it very much set the foundation for where I would pick up on music making as a hobby by 2014. This is about the point where we come to the end of my childhood and into my preteen years. As a kid, I discovered 8-bit sounds, I'm using that phrase quite loosely, and a toy keyboard that set my interest in music making in stone. In Christmas 2008, when I was 11 and already in 6th grade, I got a Nintendo DS Lite. The first 4 games I remember playing were New Super Mario Bros., Mario Kart DS, Kirby Superstar Ultra, and some game based on Lionel model trains. I'm a train enthusiast, by the way. Little did 11-year-old Spade knew at the time how much middle school would take a toll on him, and these games, mostly New Super Mario Bros. And Mario Kart DS, would help to ease his mind. Like the games I had played before on my Game Boy Advance SP, I would sometimes boot up these games just to listen to their music. The plus of a DS Lite is that it can also play Game Boy Advance games, which I did use to play the remaining Game Boy Advance games I had at the time. Eventually, I got a DSi in Christmas 2009, which essentially replaced my DS Lite, though I still have both to this day. By the time I was 12, I had this mindset that it was time for me to let go of some things from my childhood, which included my GameCube, my collection of Thomas and Friends toy trains from the Japanese Kamitomi, and my Game Boy Advance SP. I gave away my Game Boy Advance SP to one of my cousins in Christmas 2010, including the remaining games I had for it. Going back to 2009, this was when I first discovered MIDI when I got my first laptop from a pawn shop. I remember discovering the vgmusic.org website, downloading a bunch of MIDIs and listening to them with that sound font that's built into Windows PCs. I also remember editing the MIDIs with various MIDI editors that I had found off of the web, though I used Anvil Studio the most out of all of them by simply changing their instruments. I also discovered and downloaded Mario Paint Composer, though I remember hearing a Mario Paint's cover of Never Gonna Give You Up back in 2007 when I was 10. This was when I started to make songs. I put that word in quotes because they were nothing more than unscrupulous nonsense. Eventually, at some point in 2011, I made the fatal mistake of deleting System32 on my laptop in order to increase its storage space and speed. You can imagine how 14-year-old Spade felt at the time when it had to be thrown out. But in any case, this preteen era of mine was what further increased my interest in how music is done. Now, we're getting into my teenage years. I already mentioned this part in the description of my song Song 1 2023 edition, but I will mention it again in this part of the video, since I feel like it's relevant to my music journey. In 2011, when I was 14, I found a MIDI sequencer app on my iPod Touch. It was a payware app, and I don't know about you, but whenever I wanted to buy an app from the iOS App Store, I had to ask my mom to do it. She did do that for the X-Plane Flight Simulator, since I am also an aviation enthusiast. I did buy some apps, however, without asking her, which got me into a little trouble. But for most payware apps on the iOS App Store, I got them using gift cards whenever my mom took me and my sister to stores like Walmart, and I believe I got the iOS MIDI sequencer app this way. The app's interface was easy to navigate, and I checked out all of the demo tunes included with it. I didn't make any music here. Rather, I simply just edited the demo songs by changing their instruments, like what I had done with the MIDIs I had in my laptop. It was nice to see that music can be composed of multiple tracks, or channels in the context of MIDI, with each track being a different instrument. I deleted this app sometime later either due to losing interest or needing more storage space. But there's another memory I can recall at age 14 in 2011. It's the earliest in my memory that I can recall listening to video game music more than I have ever done before. Having an iPod Touch, which I got in Christmas 2010, meant having access to YouTube and websites such as Kingdom Hearts Insider's repository of video game music. I was listening to music from games I had played at the time, either in streamed format or some MIDI remake of it. Before I deleted System32 on my laptop, I had tons of MIDIs on it that I will listen to, though it also did mean I cross-referenced them with whatever MP3s of any video game music I also had on it, making this the earliest in my life where I became peeved by how inaccurate many of the MIDI recreations were. In terms of this video's topic, 2011 is the year that I became heavily interested in MIDIs and other means of music creation. After 2011 would basically be a year and a half of me listening to various Mario Paint recreations of either video game music or mainstream music. In 2012, when I was 15, I discovered something called Black MIDI music. The best way I can describe this is something akin to using the palms of your hands and your arm in addition to using your fingers to play a song on a piano. I became amused by what I had heard. I never downloaded any Black MIDIs on my mom's computer because, as I mentioned previously, I messed up my laptop by deleting System32, since I saw how ridiculous the number of notes they have, and in some of the videos there was some lagging, which is obvious in the various Black MIDI covers of Bad Apple featuring Nomiko from around this time. My interest in Black MIDIs did fade sometime near the end of 2012. After I turned 16 in 2013, my parents ended up having to move out of the apartment we had stayed at since 2007, where we ended up staying at one of my grandparents' houses for a few months before moving into another apartment. During our stay at one of my grandparents' houses, I had become interested in how music and sound were done on vintage video game consoles. I remember hearing custom music in Super Mario World as far back as 2011, and 2013 was when I saw a bunch of them. 2013 was also the time I discovered Homebrew games, the first one being a game called Inversion for the NES, which I saw a tool-assisted speedrun of. I was intrigued that new games were being developed for the gaming systems that were long out of production. I liked how catchy the music was in Inversion, which had something of an NES-era Mega Man feel to it. This circles back to how I became interested in how the sounds and music were done in vintage video game consoles. There was something I did in 2013 while me, my sister, and my parents lived at one of my grandparents' houses. Remember that iOS MIDI sequencer app I mentioned earlier? At this point in 2013, I had a second generation iPad, which basically replaced my iPod Touch, though I still have both to this day, albeit with cracked screens. At the time, the iPad could run apps that were made for the iPhone and iPod Touch, albeit scaled up to match the iPad's resolution, and I decided to download that MIDI sequencer app to my iPad. While I basically did the same thing I did in 2011, at some point I thought, I want to try and make a song with this app. Now, at age 16 in 2013, I had no concept of music theory, let alone the different music scales that are out there. But I did have some concept of tempo, which was from the various MIDI editors I'd used at age 14, and it did help out with placing the drum sequence. The rest were just an absolute mess of clashing notes, since, as I mentioned, I had no concept of music theory at all, but I did have some fun with it. Being at just above a minute, I decided to call the song I made Song1.mid. I did attempt to start another song sometime later, though it didn't go anywhere since I didn't know what to do with it. Eventually, I ended up deleting the MIDI sequencer app in order to increase storage space on my iPad, causing Song1.mid to become lost to time. I only have a vague memory of how the song sounded, but I don't think I could ever recreate it again. In any case, this is the earliest in my memory where I attempted to create a song, even though it might have been something that could drive any musician crazy. After having experienced the iOS MIDI sequencer app again would be another time of me just discovering more Super Mario World custom music and listening to more of my favorite video game music on YouTube. Going into 2014, after I turned 17, I became interested in seeing if I could do some custom Super Mario World music. After going down a few rabbit holes, I stumbled upon the Super Mario Central website, which has a program called Add Music K. This program uses something called Music Macro Language, or MML for short, and is something that was prominently used by Japanese video game composers back in the 80s and 90s. I was excited that I was going to try something that would allow me to make Super Mario World custom music. I should mention that at this point, I had been using emulators to play vintage Nintendo games and hacks of Super Mario Kart and Super Mario World for about 4 years. My excitement was short-lived, as while I was reading through the manual for how to use Add Music K, reading the MML files of the encoded songs, those from Super Mario World, made me feel like I was looking at Egyptian hieroglyphs. I ended up leaving it to the side while continuing to listen to my favorite video game tunes. 2014 was also the time I was looking for music-related stuff on the iOS App Store on my iPad. It's been about 10 years, but I think I used terms like Music Maker and Music Sequencer to search for something, and I did find a few things in the category I would like to call a beat maker. Basically, these apps had pre-made sequences, and you simply press buttons to activate or deactivate any of them to create some kind of beat. Eventually, in November 2014, right around Thanksgiving week, I discovered an app called Oxy. Its editor was something akin to a MIDI editor, though you only had 4 tracks, a percussion track, a bass track, and 2 tracks where you can choose any synth instrument you want. It also allowed you to choose whatever scale you wanted, in addition to setting the tempo. I immediately liked this app, and I created my first song with it, which was... I'll give you a snippet of it. I called this song Fly High So Fast, which, in hindsight, doesn't fit the song's feel, but it's certainly better than whatever I tried to do with Song1.mid a year prior. All through Thanksgiving week 2014, I would make some more songs, including a remake of Song1.mid that I called Song1 Remastered, which I'll give you a snippet of. This is the point in my life where I began to have a penchant for chords. I did attempt to use Add Music K again around this time, using other MML-based programs to help me. When that didn't work, I decided to try changing the samples in one of the Super Mario World songs. I eventually decided that MML was not for me, so I gave up trying to learn it. Over time, I would use other apps with features similar to Oxy, such as Beatwave and Medley Music Maker. Music Maker Jam, which I first tried in 2015, uses pre-recorded loops for one to create music, though I didn't use it for long. In any case, this era in my life, from 2014 to 2015, was when my hobby of music making was established. And now, folks, we are coming around to the point where I consider the start of my chiptune music journey. It was also in 2014 when I discovered the article on Famitracker over on the Video Game Music Preservation Foundation wiki. I was intrigued that I found a software that can make music for the NES. I didn't download it though. I simply kept it in mind while I continued to use music making apps on my iPad through 2014 and 2015. After I turned 19 in 2016, I decided to revisit Famitracker's page on the Video Game Music Preservation Foundation wiki, and I also found the website for it as well. I decided to download the program from the website. At first, I was stumped, since I had never used a music tracker software before. After some time, I read the manual, and I was able to create my first song, which I called my first NSF song. Here's a snippet of it. I felt accomplished for using a music software that uses a different way of making music. I did make a few more stuff in Famitracker, while also switching between it and the music making apps on my iPad. I would eventually discover a few more music tracker softwares in 2016, including SNES GSS, DevilMask, and OpenMPT. I was confused by SNES GSS when I opened it up. I found DevilMask when I wanted to look for a tracker that makes music for systems other than the NES, and I think I found OpenMPT by accident while going down the rabbit holes of various other music trackers. Learning about the unique sound chips and their limitations did make me see why the sound effects tended to cut off some instruments in the various tool-assisted speedruns of games from the 3rd and 4th generation of video games. Before then, I just assumed some trickery was done to make music and sound for the vintage gaming consoles. Going into 2017, I started to use the various music trackers more than the music making apps on my iPad, and was also when I started to make original songs again, since I mainly made covers for about a year when I made version 1 of Moonlight Mountains. I remember being uncertain when I started to make and share original music. As the Plotagon version of my Elfsona explained in my YouTube channel history video, I was afraid of sharing the songs I had made on my iPad, thinking that so many people would call them terrible. The reception towards my song Moonlight Mountains was well received, so I decided to keep on going with making few originals using the knowledge I had gained from the music making apps on my iPad. Eventually, by 2018, I had abandoned music making apps on my iPad, preferring to make chiptune and sample-based music using trackers. And I believe this is where we come to today. I never knew how far I would take my music making hobby over the years, and to think it all started with that Game Boy Color as a toddler, which planted the seed for my interest in chiptunes, and that Techno Beats keyboard I had at age 10 that planted the seed for my interest in music making. As I've said at the start of this video, I want to thank you all for listening to the covers and originals I put over the years. I still can't believe that I now have 2,000 subscribers on my channel, and I know it'll slowly go up from there. And now, you have all heard the voice of the guy who has been running this channel, and future updates and probably Q&As I will do here will be done using my actual voice from now on. Thank you all for tuning into this video, and I will see you all in a future video. Wherever you live in this world, have a good day or night, and as my coworkers like to tell me in my job, you are all amazing. Alright, see you another time.